Okay, fellas, let's see if we can knock this out. If you're in G period, you're gonna watch this tomorrow, Friday 3:20. Those of you catching this in E period, we're in our third or fourth week of this freaking viral outbreak. So anyway, speciation, the act of becoming a new species. Open this up. Speciation, when a new species emerges from a previous one, it's not a specific event. It's a period of time separated by several events when one group can no longer reproduce with another one, and we call that reproductive isolation. So as over time, as the species change enough, they can no longer breed. When they initially become isolated in an isolation event, they can't breed with each other, but if they were together, they could. This is about biological inability to reproduce. So over time, after they've not been together for long enough, they are reproductively isolated. And we're going to talk about three different types over here. That's the wrong pen. Give me that. Three different types. That's not a three, that's that symbol, whatever the hell that is. So at this line, you see that purple has resulted in the emergence of red and blue phenotypes. This is the isolation at this point in time, right through there. And initially, as you can see, as they're crossing this line, they could all reproduce with each other. But as they become further and further and further apart, they can no longer reproduce. And that is what we're going to call reproductive isolation. So this results from three possibilities. I know geographic is listed second. You're going to understand that one the easiest. So I want to go there. If two gene pools get separated, the species are no longer interbreeding and therefore are subject to change without influence from the other side. They're not new species yet, they're just separated. So these are the possible causes, and there's more, of course. Westphal's cone. So these barriers have to be permanent anytime that the species can travel back and forth. So we can kind of just use this as the barrier if we wanted to. We could say this is it. If these species can get across this barrier, they can breed with each other. Again, I keep saying species. What we're talking about is a group prior to them becoming a new species. So in the case of this purple section here, they become separated and then they change as a result of having separate and independent opportunities to change. Once the gene flow is stopped, they're in two different locations and the outcomes can be different. It's not as subjectable to birds because they fly across those gaps and don't experience the separation in the same way. So that's why some birds are continental species. They can go from one continent to the next. And not all birds do that, but they can. So our example of geographic are the Abair and Kaibab squirrels. And what happened is, if you'll look down here in this region, the arrow's pointing to the north rim of the Kaibab squirrel and the south rim of the Grand Canyon where the Abair squirrels live. And you can see how similar they are, but the major difference of the coat color is a result of living on two different sides of that river for enough time to cause that difference, right? Okay. Behavioral isolation, and y'all can, I guess when we click on that video, what is it embedded? Let's see. Come on, recorder, move out the way. Yeah, y'all could probably click on that if you have your, I'm using VLC player, but if two groups of individuals have different behaviors that limit one from choosing a mate, they're not going to breed with each other. That ends up being a very similar situation to geographic isolation because they're not breeding with each other. And when they're subject to not breeding with each other, that meets the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium criterion of no gene flow. No gene flow into or out of the population will maintain equilibrium of that population. So if the two groups are isolated, they're not getting genes from the other populations, and they're going to evolve independently. So behavioral, these two birds, they look pretty similar, but they sing different songs. So they're not going to be parts of the same group. This one's a little bit more difficult to understand, temporal isolation. If two groups of individuals breed at different times throughout the year, then they're going to reproduce at different times throughout the year their own sets of DNA. Meaning, some flowers only open up during the spring, some are summer, some are fall. And if you use as an example, if one type of orchid, because of its color or its height or the soil it's growing in, releases with other types of orchids at the same time, they're going to cross-pollinate each other. The ones that reproduce at a different time will not cross-pollinate each other and not share genes. So again, isolation is what's going to lead to the new phenotypes emerging due to separation. All right. Darwin's finches. This is a result of several different types of isolation occurring in one place. When Darwin realized that these birds flew out to the Galapagos Islands, he also understood that the beaks changed due to the food sources. So we mentioned this with Peter and Rosemary Grant. I believe that was, oh, that's coming up. I just did that with Bio2. So they're different beaks on relatively similar birds. They eat different food. When they arrived at the Galapagos Islands, they were very similar, and those that had small adaptational changes that allowed them to eat certain types of food continued to do that and didn't compete with the other ones. And the ones that would eat similar types of food would breed with similar types of animals, and then the beaks changed over that period of time. And this is an example of some different bird beaks that feed in different areas. So now's a good time for the actual use of the circle of the magic pen. Here we go. So what's this beak good for? They're digging down into plants or in through something long or into holes, right? And this one here, a little bit meatier or fleshier types of food or nuts that are hard to crack. Somebody like these over here, these two red ones, that would be more along the lines of flying through the air and catching insects, like these two guys down at the bottom. And then you get something like this too, this fella here. You see these tufts of feathers on top of it, and that is going to be part of the pollination feature when they're going in eating, or it could be sexual selection, but I just want you to see those features. If this bird is eating from plants that have pollen growing on, they're going to go from one plant to the other and reproduce that pollen. So anyhow, these here just shows in this diagram, the major focus is what it eats. So fruit, see the beak there for fruit. Insect eaters, birds that feed from cactus. This guy happens to, and sometimes you'd see a much longer beak for that. And then seed eaters. And the first thing you're going to notice is that the fruit and insect eaters, they're kind of up in the trees. Warblers spend time in the trees and time on the ground. But these ground finches over here, there's one thing they have in common. It's pretty obvious, right? It's their color. And this one over here is an outlier, but they are living, these guys, they're spending a lot of time in the dark shadows, whereas these are kind of blending in the trees, so the colors are more subjective to those environments. And then the fruit eaters have a parrot-like scooping bill. There's different types of grasping bills where their food lives and their beak takes them. That's what they're going to be subjected to. So different types of probing bills depending on whether they're eating a cactus or eating insects. Okay. There's another look at it, and you can see in the background there's a tree, so you can kind of see the ones that live up in the trees versus the one that lives down the floor, forest floor. And there's their relationships. Darwin presumed that an ancestral species came out and some had slight advantages over others to eat from the Galapagos Islands. Peter and Rosemary, these are the Grants. You don't always get to study natural selection in action. It takes some time. The neat thing about Peter and Rosemary is that they were working for 35 years, and in that period of time, I don't want that, I want this. In that period of time, they found this data. I'll give you 1 second to go ahead and figure out what that is. As beak size increases, number of individuals that survive increase. So larger beaks have a greater chance at survival. It's still only up here at 12 millimeters, or this is the data point at 11.6 millimeters. There's still a 46% chance of survival. So it's still a 1 in 2 chance at surviving, but it's much better than down over here. So when they found small beaks, tagged them and banded them, they didn't really find them again. So the larger ones were surviving. And if that's the case, we're going to see fewer and fewer small ones, more and more large ones, and that change will occur. And that's called adaptive radiation. When the ancestral species arrives in a new location, this could be applied to founder effect, which we already discussed. Those genes will adapt to that environment. So this ancestral population, now these colors don't exist in finches. We're using color. This could be beak sizes. We're just using color because it's an easier representation. But the red birds that get to the Galapagos find themselves adapting to become purple for whatever reason. Okay. But when the purple bird arrives on the second island, that gene pool starts to trend towards green. And you're going to predict here what happens if green goes somewhere else, that gene pool will alternatively turn into something else. And because of the new environment, the genes that arrive are not necessarily the genes that are best, and the hand is forced in the favor of the genes that are best. So this is your homework. Work on this. You can consider this classwork. Send me a screenshot of that with a screenshot of this, and that you did it, okay? And then maybe tomorrow morning, or depending on when you're getting this, I'd like to talk to you guys in our next class. Let's just say that, to talk about what the test is going to be and how we're going to manage that. Okay. See you soon.